An important concept that drove the change in marketing was one that was introduced by Levitt right in 1960, which he referred to as marketing myopia. And by this he meant that actually people couldn't see what was happening in the world around them. They had too narrow a view, too obsessed with a narrow definition of what their industry was, and not really understood that they were competing with other things, not just with direct competitors. And the example is he took the US railroad industry. Now, at the start of the 19th century and during the 19th century, trains grew to spread across the world to cover the United States with lots and lots of railways. And there was no real serious alternative. You couldn't fly, there were stagecoach and stuff, but they were much, much slower. So to move large numbers of goods and people, and in fact, in the American Civil War was the first war in which the infantry didn't march to the battles. The vast majority of the time was spent in trains, with only marching the last little bit. So you had this huge impact of trains across the commercial and the social settings of the 19th century. And no one saw an alternative. No one really saw this. And they spread everywhere. And of course, there's very little competition. But at the same time, an alternative started to emerge start of the 20th century. Along came cars, lorries, etc., things like that. But the railway industry didn't take them seriously. They didn't see them as mass transit. They saw them as local transit for lorries, and as far as cars were concerned, they were just hobbies and people enjoyed them for fun, etc. But they certainly weren't a competitor to the railroad industry. And of course, the example of the result of this you can see is the fact that the trains in the United States now are very, very limited. There's some cities have the small mass transit railroads, like Los Angeles and Atlanta, but most places they have nothing. And it's very important to recognise that actually, sorry, I said Los Angeles. Los Angeles is the one that has nothing. They got rid of all their rail provision. They just use cars, etc. So the rail industry massively disappeared, and huge rail stations, huge rail production works completely disappeared. York is an example of this. Go to the National Railway Museum. That used to be a place where real trains were kept, trains that were actually in use, trains that were built and repaired, etc. And the great big sidings, etc. Now, of course, it's a museum. Because the problem was the railroad industry saw its product directly. They looked at the train as its product. They didn't realize that actually its product was transport and that there could be a substitute product. They saw cars and lorries as being something completely separate, but actually cars and lorries were a substitute product and they were in the same transit market, just as later on planes were to be in the same transit market, etc. So they just didn't deal with it. They were too close-minded. They had myopia when they looked at it, too narrow. An alternative way of looking at this, of course, is that actually some places where the train is still a major part of the industry. And the French National Railway line, SNCF, of course, it's actually produced an app now, which allows you to book trains and work that alongside trains, run the cars, hire a car, book a coach, book a plane, arrange parking, etc. Even bikes, etc. They've the French version of Boris Bikes, that you can hire a bike, and all these things are now linked together inside the system. So of course there was a big alternative to that. It wasn't really noted by the US railway system. And of course the results of that was they lost huge amounts of market share. Okay, still looking back at product market orientation. Let's have a look at some of the examples here, give you some idea of what we mean by that. Product orientation, prior to marketing myopia, Disney would consider itself to manage amusement parks. But now, having realized that it has a much broader competition, has to think about what it is trying to represent. And of course, what it is trying to represent is we give life to the wildest dreams. We represent the true picture of America. We represent the fantasy of America. So this is very, very important, pushing itself forward. Having realized that marketing myopia, having survived the changes and the vast growth in the provision of services and the variety of products. And Nike, the old days before Levitt would have said, we sell sports shoes and sportswear. That's product orientation. But now we bring innovation and inspiration to every athlete in the world. And a little asterisk, a little appendage. If you have a body, you're an athlete. Very important to stress that they can sell aspiration to people. Xerox, we make copy equipment. But actually, business to business marketing, trying to get people, actually, we're here to improve your productivity. We make your office more efficient. Paramount, we make movies. But of course, their only thing then the competition was other filmmakers. When they first set up, no TV, theatre was very expensive, etc. But now they realize there's so much else going on. They market entertainment. These are important differences that have come about because people have started to realize the old marketing myopia system of the product orientation. So what are some of the specific characteristics of the types of markets we'll look at? So firstly, you have to bear in mind, as you would have done under the old product orientation, that there are similar products to yours which are direct competition. They're the obvious ones. But that's not the only competition you have. There are replacement products. People actually produce something that's similar and can actually do the same thing, but it doesn't have to be a similar product. It's actually answers similar needs, solves simpler problems. And we call these substitution products. There's a complementary market, things that actually will be sold alongside your products. So if they sell more of that product and that product becomes more popular, actually that might make your product more popular. Equally, if your product becomes more popular, it may make those products more popular. And there's a generic market. This is one that's often forgotten. At its very basis, you're in competition for every pound, every dollar, every yen, every renminbi, with everything that money could be spent on. So there's this huge generic market, whereas if I were to say, well, if I don't go to the pictures tonight, I might go to the theatre, I might rent a movie on TV, I might watch Netflix. But actually, there's much broader than that, because actually you can say, well, actually, don't go for a movie, you might go out for a meal. That's kind of a replacement, but it's also it's very for that. I might say, well, I'll stay in tonight and do nothing. I'll save up and go on holiday. So there are these greater competition elements that go forward. So let's have a look at an example. What is cornflakes in this bird? So we've got Kellogg's cornflakes. And their main market is, of course, cereals, other people making cornflakes. But a replacement market for them would be bread, bacon and eggs, an alternative breakfast. Complementary market, well, most people have milk on their cornflakes. And a generic market, any breakfast product, like anything else they could do in the same field. So you've got to be aware how broad competition can be, and Levitt was the first one to really write out and spot this. But there are grave weaknesses in Levitt's work. Let's not forget that. I mean, in some ways, he was too broad in some cases, and some people argued, the example they gave was whether or not people who created whips for horses should have realized they weren't in the horse whip business, they were in the transport starting business, and their competition was starter motors. And realized, of course, this situation is starting to get a little bit ridiculous and a little bit meaningless. Okay, let's try and have a quick look at a couple of basic and important points here. When we talk about increasing customer value, what do we actually measure that by? What do we mean? Well, the value is basically perceived benefits minus perceived sacrifice. And the difference between what you gain and what you have to give up to gain it is what you perceive as the value, the resultant value. And for generate customer value, like I said before, you must meet and exceed customer needs better than the competition doesn't. It's really important to remember this. This part is too often forgotten. You have to remember it is about what the competition is doing. You must exceed what they are doing. It's not just meeting the customer needs. If somebody else meets the customer needs better than you do, then they will be successful. So you have to make sure that you beat the competition and are much more efficient and much more effective than they are. It's also one thing that came about, one realization that came about, is actually it's very expensive to attract a new customer. Very expensive, much cheaper to retain an existing one, which sounds obvious, but too many firms seem to actually see this time of new customers only, new loans, new mortgages, etc. Or you're trying to get a phone, a new deal on your phone, it's only new customers only. But actually, if you do that, you risk moving on, especially in these days of compare the market, compare the meerkat. It's very easy to move on. You just go online, check prices, quick swap very easily. It's very much more difficult. So ask yourself, which brands are you truly loyal to? And what does it mean to be loyal to a brand? There are different types of loyalty. There's straightforward loyalty. You buy the product again and again. That's loyalty is repurchasing. It's behavioural. There's also loyalty as an emotional bond. Some people become attached to brands. It may be through a particular celebrity or a particular brand ambassador has actually pushed a certain brand they like, and people become very attached to this because an attitudinal connection with a bond. And there's also loyalty commitment, and the idea that it becomes more obvious and easier to buy a product, easier to take on a product, easier to do something than it is to not do it. And that's a very important change in the way people behave towards things.